Hey everybody, it is Uncle Mike, and I am here to give a presentation. I haven't done one of these like this for a while, so let's just jump right on in and see where we go. All right, so we're going to start this presentation. Talking about the many worlds interpretation. The many worlds interpretation is an interpretation of quantum mechanics that asserts that the universal wave function is objectively real. The many worlds interpretation implies that there are most likely an infinite number of universes. It is one of a number of multiverse hypotheses in physics and philosophy, and many worlds interpretation views time as a many-branched tree wherein every possible quantum outcome is realized. Now, I just want to be on the record right now. I'm by no means a quantum physicist, nor even close to being anywhere knowledgeable to speak with any certainty on quantum mechanics or physics, but quantum mechanics and physics are trying to explain the nature of reality. You don't need a friggin' PhD, and you don't need to go to any of those universities to be someone who pays attention, asks questions, and sees the nature of reality, or at least questions and tries to understand some of the components of what makes our reality work the way it does. And along those lines, I'd say Uncle Mike's got a PhD. But I want to use the many worlds interpretation as a baseline on what I want to talk about today, which, I mean, I guess it's really what I always talk about, but it has to do with the blurring of different narratives and storylines, seemingly unrelated storylines, into my experiential reality, and questioning what exactly is happening, and why it's happening, and perhaps what does it mean, if it means anything. So the many worlds interpretation's main conclusion is that the universe or multiverse in this context is composed of quantum superposition of an infinite or undefinable number of increasingly divergent, non-communicating parallel universes. Like the whole idea of like multiverse and all that sort of stuff, like it comes, which is so common in today's world. Like, what is it? Like it's 2023. I think that's the year. And this many worlds theory, it was first proposed in 1957. So what is that? 43 plus 23 is 66 years ago. So that was like cutting edge science and mathematics and all sorts of stuff like that. Like nowadays, it's like, fodder for The Simpsons. Like this idea of like multi-universes or multiverses is whether agreed upon by everyone, I don't know, but it is a commonly understood concept in our modern world. And so this is where it begins. But what I want to talk about here is like in the multi-world, many worlds interpretation. The idea is that they're non-communicating parallel universes. So here's an example. Like, this is just any event, in your life, my life, anyone's life, and you're going to go up or down, like left or right, this way or that way. And so it splits. And so now there's like two. There, in one universe you go here, in the other universe you chose the other direction. And then there's another choice, and then it splits again, and it goes there and there. Here's another way of showing it. And when quantum mechanics and this type of like questioning reality from this perspective was beginning to be established. I think it was the 1930s, maybe the 1940s. I don't know. The idea was that every time there was a choice, that the unchosen path collapsed upon itself. But the multiverse idea says, like, no, they didn't collapse. It's just the observer or your consciousness goes in the direction of the choice. And it, let's say this is like the choice that brought you this was 5 years ago, and here are all your choices, and here you are today. The many worlds interpretation would say that each one of these is a different reality that exists somewhere and like really happens. And of the choices on the path that you're on, like, it seems to be linear or coherent, but that's just a function of experience, and that's not how it really works. But what I want to talk about and what I'm interested in is the fact that I don't think they're non-communicating, or at least I'm open to the idea, or even more so, I'm experiencing a reality where there's a bleed through, where you see this, where these different storylines, like, I mean, I think that in my opinion, based upon my own experience of being alive, not like reading any friggin' book, but like, the book of my life, is that, there's some degree of accuracy maybe in describing what life experience is like, how it all works. Like, this is somewhat accurate. I don't know what the full accurate picture is. I don't know, if anyone ever would be able to. And then the bigger question is, like, where is it all happening? What's the mystery of life and all that other stuff? I mean, those are even bigger questions. But what I am experiencing and also playing with in a very, very conscious way is moving from one line to another and seeing reality re-render around, like, outer world reality changing itself to fit the frequency of the pathway which I'm actually holding inside, aka there's bleed through, that they are communicating. This whole idea of being non-communicated and divergent and separate from one another. I don't know if that's true. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So one of the other reasons is why I chose to start with this many worlds interpretation is because I also like Mike Wann's insanity, right? Because I say they're communicating. That's my insanity. I don't think there's no such thing as, sane and insane. Like, it's just a comparison of the way one perceives reality based upon mainstream interpretation of reality. It's wordplay. It's, it's part of the matrix way of stopping any sort of independent thought. But anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's what I've always been talking about. Playing with storylines, seeing pattern recognition, bleed through, and so forth. And I'm going to be talking about probably the storyline which I know best, which is my own. That's the only thing which I think we're really qualified to speak about, is our own storyline. So let's continue on. Here's another schematic trying to demonstrate the many worlds interpretation, and this looks a little bit more complex than these. But when I was looking for slides or images to pull together, I saw this one, and what just jumped out at me is, like, for whatever reason, for how they chose to show it, you've got this figure right here, and I'm like, hey, I know what that figure looks like. I've seen this one before. That's the Thelema Aleister Crowley hexagram. And it represents the heavenly macrocosmos, or cosmic or planetary forces, and is a symbol equivalent to the Rosicrucian rose cross or the Egyptian Ankh. These images just keep on, or the rose cross and the Ankh, from my own life experience, these symbols keep coming up also in life. So we'll probably come back to that in a moment. But let's just jump right in. So decoding Pittsburgh 2.0. So today is calendar day Tuesday. No such thing as Tuesday, but like that's the 7-day cycle. And this past weekend was Memorial Day, and I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, doing the Decoding Pittsburgh event. This is the second annual one, and for the most, it was a great event. It's a lot of fun to go to this event. Meet up with Ross Ben and Brother John and Khufu and Riley and Ross Maisha and Jesse the Mage and Emily, and I can't think of other names or escape. Probably about 20 people came out to it. There was a sharing information. We're touring around the city, and that their presentations, but probably more significant in my opinion is the coming together of like-minded and open-minded individuals, and then also coming together in the land which we now call Pittsburgh. And I presented this year, and I presented last year. For the most part, I just gave the same presentation I gave last year. And I want to talk about that for a moment, and how it ties all into this many worlds interpretation. So the presentation I gave in Pittsburgh was talking about the ancient name of what we now call Pittsburgh, Dayaoga, the land of Dayaoga, and which means the beautiful place of three rivers, the beautiful people of three rivers. It was known, this part of the world was known as the umbilical cord to the mother, and it was a spiritual center. It was a destination for pilgrimage. It was going there as a mythological return to the womb. And in my presentation, building upon this is the foundation, this idea that the land itself was known prehistorically, before we started before the story, the history book histories, it was known as the umbilical cord, and understanding that from a more that name has an objective truth due to the land and the quality of the land, which we now think of Pittsburgh. Like that quality of the land naturally exuded an energy, intrinsically and naturally exuded an energy where it was self-evident to previous people that this somehow is in correspondence with the concept of umbilical cord to Earth, to Mother Earth, to that which we all experience our physical lives within. And the reason for that is Pittsburgh sits at the confluence of two rivers, the Allegheny and I'm going to just call it the Mon. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's got like 5 syllables. It begins M-O-N. And then those two rivers where the confluence occurs or meets, then it forms the Ohio, and then the Ohio goes and meets up with the Missouri, and then it becomes the Mississippi River. So Pittsburgh was the land of Pittsburgh was a key land, a confluence of major waterways, which we now think of as the Mississippi. Quick side note, the very fact that I'm naming this, like this river is the Allegheny and this river is the Ohio and this river is the Mississippi, like throw all that, I'm using that as a point of reference so you know what I'm talking about. It's one body of water. Like the idea to name different parts of it different names is certainly serves a purpose for us to articulate where we're talking about, but don't think for a moment that they're different. It's all the same. That's part of spell casting with the naming of things. This area was always very significant by looking at the concentration of mounds going up the Mississippi, and then where the Mississippi splits into the west and the east, the Missouri and the Ohio, a higher number of mounds continues up the Ohio than the Mississippi, which gives an end, and there seems to be a highest concentration in this area of Pittsburgh. It was always recognized as being a very significant place because of these rivers. And the whole area of Pittsburgh was filled with springs, hot springs, cold springs, salt springs, mineral springs. And it was, it was a intrinsically important special area. And by having this name of the umbilical cord, it implies a connection to the womb, and the womb is the home for each of us. Each of us, our first home was within a womb of our mother. And within the womb, we can really understand what it means to be at home, and maybe even both literally, but then metaphorically, because when you're in the womb, like, there's nothing really to worry about. When you are at home, like, everything is provided for you, your food, your shelter. All you need to do is be. You can be a human being, not a human doing, as our culture is forcing everyone. That's our culture turns human beings into persons, which are human resources, which feed a machine. That's what the program is about. And the program works because, for a variety of different reasons. But the reason why Pittsburgh is so significant in the nature of my presentation was how this intrinsic idea of home on Earth that energy had been usurped and manipulated in order to create false home through false reality and false stories and all that sort of stuff, as part of the multitudes of techniques which has taken the population of the world, definitely the Western world, and has disconnected us from home, creating that void and having everyone seek a false matrix home. The matrix says more than anything, the American dream is to own a home and like to get a mortgage, mort, death, and gauge is a grip in French. It's a death grip. That's what they want you. They want to give you false security by working your job so you can pay your mortgage to think that you're at home, but that's not a real home. We can see the spell work and the magic was done, or at least that's what the nature of my presentation was in Pittsburgh, is how Pittsburgh, through Carnegie and all of the founding of Pittsburgh, the first police department, like so many firsts come out of Pittsburgh. And if you don't know where Pittsburgh is, it's in the middle of nowhere. You take away Pittsburgh and there's really nothing in that part of the world. Pittsburgh is a relatively small city population-wise, and its influence is enormous. So, all right, so that's what the presentation for me was about. It was a really good presentation. Deoga is a special land, 3 rivers plus a mythical underground river. They all meet at the point. Ancestors called it the cord. This powerful energy has been usurped by the matrix. Pittsburgh's extraordinary cultural achievements are an inversion of the truth. Deoga's true nature, remembering Deoga, is the homecoming. The control system's modus operandi. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation. This is how I began it, but I want to just kind of like showcase this for you guys to see where I'm going with all this. So like this is how it works. You disconnect people from the real home, you hide the real home, and then you provide a false home. Deoga is an umbilical cord to the womb, the home. Spell casting hides the truth. Pittsburgh is an extraordinary inversion because it is built upon an intrinsically extraordinary earth. There is significant home symbolism found throughout Pittsburgh. So Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, it's the first known home in the New World. Shanopin's town was the place of the home for the displaced indigenous refugees in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, all the Lenape and the other peoples that lived the East Coast in New Jersey, they were pushed west. And so what we now think of Pittsburgh, that was like, became like a refugee home but as people were pushed further and further west away from their ancestral lands. We can see that in the more modern times, Pittsburgh keeps on is the epicenter of all things related to moving people from homes. The entire urban renewal of the 1950s started in Pittsburgh. Creative class gentrification of the 2000s began in Pittsburgh. Smart cities, that whole idea, Pittsburgh, Facebook metaverse, all that stuff, they're all started or strongly linked to Pittsburgh. So this was like the presentation. I'll give you the summary. Deoga contains an intrinsic quality linking human beings to the home on earth. This is recognized through the link to the name umbilical cord and the role of home and housing. Renaming Deoga to Pittsburgh marks the spellcast of linking the intrinsic quality of Deoga into the matrix. Pittsburgh can't help but be great because it's built upon the top of greatness. By taking control of the intrinsic home, sorcerers inverted and dictate what home is in the matrix. So the reason, the purpose of doing this type of decoding and doing this type of presentation is what I've been referring to is collapsing false narratives. As we begin to point out, like, history and just like the subliminals which are all around us, and we begin to become open to other many worlds models, many different expressions of life, maybe on the same land. These false stories begin to collapse. And when they begin to collapse, like, kind of some weird stuff happens. So I gave this presentation for the first time last year. And since presenting the Pittsburgh home presentation last year, my home has been deconstructing. My definition of home, my experience of home, all this sort of stuff. Like, as an individual, I've always had a very, very strong connection to a stable within, matrix ideas of stability, nice home life. And as I was well kept and well rewarded within matrix reward systems. But as I began to question all of these stories, and as I began to see these, poke holes in these false narratives and start telling other stories, I've been experiencing my previous life narratives like collapsing, and that has undoubtedly happened with Pittsburgh and home. If you've been following my work, you've probably, I've been talking about this for the past year, but I'm going to, walk through it. Where it really began was, it all began November 30th, 2021, when I got the invitation to go and present at, the Susquehanna Mystery to a bunch of Freemasons. And literally the day after that, my home life like deconstructed, and within a week I was living in Millersville, Pennsylvania, and within a week I found myself living in Baltimore, with someone who I didn't really know. Like, everything just lined up perfectly for me to move into Baltimore. I didn't want to move into Baltimore, but that was my only option, so I moved into Baltimore. This is where the house was. This amazing, like, on a certain level, it was fantastic, like, completely supported. It was tough, but I'm living in this house overlooking this this huge ridge and wooded area in Baltimore with no heat, no nothing. But I find myself there. Life brings me there, and then it turns out that this house is less than a mile. This is where my mother grew up, at the intersection of Hillsdale, and I forget the name of this road right here. But my mother grew up there. I didn't grow up in Baltimore, but my mother grew up like 1 mile away. Like life brought me there, after this Freemasonic thing. I spent a little bit of time in Nome countryside, and then shortly after that, found myself moving into Bechtelsville, Pennsylvania. So the timeline was November 2021. I moved here February 2nd, 2022. And then on December 27th, 2022, Christy and I, we move into Bechtelsville, Pennsylvania, 1227. And then I come to find out shortly afterwards that we could see on December 27th, 1776 in Amityville, Berks, Pennsylvania, is the wedding of Johann Wilhelm Wellm and Elizabeth Wann. And this here is my family line. This is me, that's my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and so forth. It goes up this line, and then they are married on December 27th, 1766, December 27th, 2022, to 256 years later. This in Bechtelsville, this in Amityville, and here we have, this is Bechtelsville, and here's Amityville. They're like 8 miles away. Like this was really close. This was less than a mile away, but this was my mother's line. I'm stepping back into my mother's line home history, and I'm stepping back into my father's line home history. And so I just gave that presentation in Pittsburgh, and the story of home is continuing to morph. And this time I'm going to return to where this journey really began for me, which is the Susquehanna River. So when I began telling the Susquehanna Mystery, I was, it's funny. So I was living here in Lancaster, and I split up with my wife this like 9 years ago. Is it that long? Maybe even, let's say like 9 years ago. And then I moved down to Wilmington, Delaware. And then I came back. I lived in Wilmington, Delaware for September through March, so 6 months. And I made the starboard here. This is where I made the starboard. Look at this. Wilmington, Delaware is right here on the Delaware River. And then I returned to Marietta, Pennsylvania, which is right on the Susquehanna River. And I lived there for a bunch of years, and this is when the Susquehanna Mystery comes out. When I do all the research, I never even heard of the Susquehanna River. I knew what it was, but I didn't know what it was until I lived there. Then moved to Millersville, Pennsylvania. From Millersville, I go down to Baltimore. From Baltimore, I go to Quarryville. That's where Nome Countryside is. Then Bechtelsville, and then I'm going to find myself here in Airville, Pennsylvania. Remember Airville? That's going to make a little bit more sense in a moment. So here's Airville. It is the Susquehanna River. It is on the western side of the Susquehanna in York County. This is Lancaster County. This is York County, and I'll be there. Interestingly enough, when my in this family line, they eventually moved out of this part of Pennsylvania, and they eventually moved into Baltimore. But where they moved before Baltimore was like right around here. Actually, no, probably right around here. This is where they were. And I'm finding myself in this area. And so this is the Susquehanna River. The house is literally 50 feet from the river bank. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the Susquehanna Mystery, but I'm going to have a refresher. I mean, it's still fresh in my mind, but I don't know about the viewers here. So I'm going to walk through some of the Susquehanna Mystery. And so the Susquehanna Mystery, we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, of the many worlds interpretation, and reality and consciousness and all that sort of stuff. And at the end of the day is like, we don't really know anything. You know, we have stories and we have definitions, but we don't fully know the nature of where we're of anything in our experiential reality. We might know a small portion of it. One of the biggest things, I think about is, the nature of, like, what is a river? What exactly is a river? Like, I know the definition from an ecological perspective and from like a cultural perspective, but like, what is this thing we're having our life experience on? Like, why? What really is the nature of a river? I mean that rhetorically. So the Susquehanna Mystery, I began telling the story on a larger scale. May 12th, 2018 was when I first went on the Higher Side Chats, it's one of the bigger podcasts on the planet. And I first told the Susquehanna River Goddess worship story and the big rituals. So that was like 5 years ago. And so what that basically is what is the relationship between rivers and reality? And it's really deep, or multi-layered story, the Susquehanna Mystery, but it basically says, like, the oldest river on the planet, the oldest river system on the planet is also where we have the birthplace or the first fruit of computers and electrical distribution and globalism. And also there's so many things that are incredibly unique and esoteric and magical and secret society on this river, which no one has ever heard of unless you live in backwoods Pennsylvania, and everything started on it. That can't be coincidence. Like, what is going on here? So, Jamestown. So we got right here, that's where we have Jamestown is the birthplace of the British Empire in the United States. And that's, if you really want to go and look at globalism, which I'm going to define as monoculturalism, it really came through, it comes through the infrastructure of the United States and the British Empire, like all the companies, Hollywood or New York banking, all that sort of stuff. Like the fact that English is, the de facto language on the planet. All of those are byproducts of the British Empire and the United States. And Jamestown is where the British Empire began. And it's also where the first colony in the colony systems, which eventually become the United States, and that is right here. The Chesapeake Bay is the Susquehanna River. They just have different names, just as I was talking about the Mississippi. It's just one body of water, and that's, this is where Jamestown is, this is Chesapeake Bay, and where it empties out into the Atlantic. We see right here, ENIAC, it was the invention of the first all-purpose digital computer signaled the birth of the information age, whereas ENIAC is found at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, the first large-scale general-purpose electronic digital computer. So it was built in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania, and then it was established, or it went to its home at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And where is the Aberdeen Proving Grounds? This is Aberdeen Proving Grounds. It's the Susquehanna River, where it empties in the Chesapeake Bay. So where the D is, that's the first computer. Right here is globalism. Here's the first computer. Then we see right here, Hotel Edison in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. It was the first building to be lit with Edison's 3-wire system of electrical distribution. Thomas Edison, greatest inventor of history, first electrification project, Sunbury. And so where is Sunbury? Sunbury is right here, the meeting place of these 3 wires right here. Like, these are some of the tools that manage the reality which we know to be like computer, electricity, and globalism. Like, we just think that's the way it's got to be, or this is advancement. But like, that's not necessarily true. That is just one world. And then secondly, like, they're all tied. The first of them are tied to the oldest friggin' river. Like, what's going on here? It's part of the Susquehanna Mystery. It's only part of it. So the Susquehanna Mystery, like, also is tied into this thing, the John Smith map of Virginia. John Smith was the leader of Jamestown, which we just talked about. And this map is associated with him. And this is the Chesapeake Bay right here. And this map came out in, the 1612, I think it was. And if you were to look closely, like right here, you'll see that the 40 is reversed. 39 looks normal, but the 40 is reversed. It's found right there. We could see that mispaginations are indications of Baconian ciphers. Francis Bacon's the guy who's behind this. And they don't mention this map in the book where this is from, but it's talking about how in the Shakespearean folios, or like the book which had all of Shakespeare's plays when they were first published, there were certain the pages were misnumbered, and within those misnumberings were clues to those with eyes to see, like, okay, this is where you're going to go and find like the secret information. So when we see like something like this reverse 40, that's not coincidental. Then we see this Susquehannock right here. We see like, oh, look, Freemason, look right there. And at the end of the day is like, in here is a code which says the Susquehanna River in the 40th parallel. That's what this 40 is. That's what that Susquehanna represents. The Susquehannocks are giant-like people. And if you go there, this is a map. This is the Susquehanna River in the blue right there. This is exactly the 40th parallel. One, you find there's a park here, and then two, that park is perfectly aligned between these three colleges: Franklin and Marshall College, York College, and Elizabethtown College. So this is actually, there's a Freemasonic retirement home there. But for the purpose of what we're talking about right now, this is just part of the mystery. Right here, we find this. This is what it looks like. That's what this little circle right here in the water looks like. It's called High Point Scenic Vista. Opened up literally on the 400th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown. So this is Jamestown, and this is where that secret location is headed, or is included. And then this park right here opens up. This is what it looks like at the top of the hill. Beautiful, spectacular vistas. My Rights to the 40th Parallel talks all about like where to go and find all these places. This is what this looks like from a bird's eye point of view. It's a sun and a moon. It's 40 degrees, 0 minutes, 6 seconds. This same symbol, this sun and moon, sun and moon, sun and moon, used throughout the ancient world. We've got this, the sun and moon right there in the middle of this cross, but that's only part of the story, because if you actually were to extend this circle right here is this circle right here. So you have 1, 2, 3. If you were to go and extend it, like this is like, go do this yourself. Go put one line right here on Google Earth on Elizabethtown College, and then go all the way down here and put on Washington College, and you can see it goes right over High Point Scenic Vista and intersects the line that connects Franklin and Marshall College and York College. You can go and verify this yourself. But now we've got a literal road. We've got this cross right here, and this line is kind of paralleled this part of the Susquehanna River. So this is all just like part of, remember I talked about the Rose Cross, and we keep seeing the Rose Cross. Where do we see that? Right here. This symbol right here is the Rosicrucian Rose Cross. I've gone over this in other videos more in detail, why this is a Rose Cross. I mean, at the very least, like Lancaster is the Red Rose City, and this York is the White Rose City, and this is the Rose Cross, and this is the Invisible College of the Rosicrucians. And then we've got the fourth one right here, the fourth college, making the cross Washington College. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is just how it all lines up. This is part of the mystery. This on the same river where, the whole world begins. Right here is Aberdeen Proving Grounds, like where the first computer is, so it didn't go right over there. But in this area, we also have the Susquehanna petroglyphs. The petroglyphs are right there. And Tlaquiel, who was a Tolteca Chichimeca elder, teacher, heir, and guardian of the oral tradition, author, and spiritual guide. I mean, pause this and read all about who this man was. He was recently named the grandfather of the grandfathers in the Hall of Deputies in Mexico City by an indigenous council. He was the supreme director of Incultonono, the spiritual institution for the cosmic man, the first indigenous spiritual organization to be recognized by the government of Mexico for over 500 years. A man who's highly respected and accomplished. I believe 2012 he transitioned. So right here, though, we see in 1947, Tlaquiel took on a mission of exploring and corroborating history of the Confederation of the Anahuac. He found evidence of this migration of the Four Arrows, including to be in Chaco Canyon and the Susquehanna River petroglyphs. Like, he came here to these Susquehanna River petroglyphs. Like, that's part of his work, shows a connection between the petroglyphs and this four-arrow migration, the great cultural migration from Mexico throughout North America. It connects to this area as well. So that's all part of the Susquehanna Mystery. So that was just a refresher. There's a refresher. I'm 41 minutes in. So I want to go back to the river house. I'm going back to the house where I'm moving to, or Christy and I are moving to, right here. This is where it is. So we've got a little bit of a reminder, like, the Susquehanna. I moved away from the Susquehanna twice now. I mean, actually, no, Baltimore is right on the Susquehanna. Baltimore is on the Chesapeake. But when I was living here in Bechtelsville, like, this would literally be in the wilderness. The wilderness is defined as the area between the forest area between the Susquehanna River and the Delaware River, between the Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Bay. This area is known as the wilderness. This is why the woman of the wilderness, Kelpius monks, were here. Right here is where the Ephrata Cloister was, the first Rosicrucian permanent colony. And so I was in Bechtelsville, and now I'm coming back here to Airville. Oh, that's what I want to show you, Airville. So that's what's crazy about this. Many people ask, like, what is this? Shouldn't there be a fourth circle? Before I knew that this went all the way down, I was like, I don't know. There should be. This is Airville. This is where the house is, right there, right on this line. Let me see if I could even make that bigger. Let's see if it blows up. Airville. So right here, I'm moving to Airville. And where's the bridge? All right, so actually this is where the house is, right here, because it's the bridge that goes right over it. So it's a little bit further out. Let me go back to 50%. All right, so where am I? We're back to the river house. So here we are in the river house. This is the part of land you could see. It's like really in the middle of nowhere. There's no easy way to get here. It is, there's just no easy way to get there. It is one of the most remote areas you are going to find anywhere near the 95 corridor, because in theory, that's probably 20 miles, if even 20 miles, from Route 95, but it is so remote here that you feel like you are completely in the middle of nowhere. And what I want to do right now is I want to talk a little bit about the Susquehanna River. I was just talking about it from like a cultural perspective, all of the things that are on it from a cultural perspective. But another way which we can understand or have another perspective in order to have a greater under and overstanding of the Susquehanna River is by looking at it just through the lens of geology. And not to say that the geology is the end-all description of what the river is, but I want to use geology as a lens in order to have a better understanding of what it may be pointing at. So I'm going to read through a couple pages, then we're going to go to specifically the area of where this house is, which Christy and I'll be moving to. So, mountains and meteorites, how the Susquehanna and the Chesapeake Bay were formed. Remember, the Chesapeake Bay is the Susquehanna River. The Susquehanna River drops 1,200 feet during its journey from Cooperstown, New York, Baseball Hall of Fame, to the Chesapeake Bay. It has seen many changes in the landscape through which it flows over the past 325 million years. That number is it's meaningless. Like, we can't imagine anything probably more than like 10,000. Any number bigger than 10,000 is an abstract. Today, the Susquehanna River is considered one of the oldest rivers in the United States, if not the oldest. It's the world. The river flows over rocks that are younger than itself, and that is unique. So that's a really weird thing. It's saying that the river is even older than what it flows on top of. Rewind the Earth's geologic video to at least 325 million years ago. In the vicinity of Baltimore, Maryland, and Wilmington, Delaware, there was the Taconic Mountains, and they're formed from an island arc collision some 425 million years ago. The Appalachian Mountains did not exist yet. An ocean occupied the area where that mountain range is located today. Although the Taconic Mountains have eroded, the river was flowing in the opposite direction of today, creating its early channel. That's kind of confusing writing, in my opinion, but they're talking about the Susquehanna. Pangea, fast forward 300 million years ago, a huge collision between Africa and North America occurred to help in forming the supercontinent Pangea. It's very possible all this is just made up bullshit, like none of this happened, but it is the best stuff we got. This collision is known to geologists as the Alleghanian orogeny, which seriously deformed our crust into a series of folds and broken pieces of crust containing faults. The Appalachian Mountains were pushed up during this episode, which lasted about 20 million years. The Appalachians were once as high as the present-day Rockies. Now the Appalachian high point, the Susquehanna reversed its course and flowed in a southeastern direction. All right, we'll go through here. About 35 million years ago, our area was greeted with an extraterrestrial visitor. An asteroid collided with Earth in what is today the southern portion of the Chesapeake Bay, traveling at 144,000 miles per hour, right? Like, how do they know that? The object created a 25-mile wide crater, a half-mile deep. This event was the first step in creating the Chesapeake Bay. So the Chesapeake Bay, underneath that, there's a 25-mile wide crater. It's one of the biggest craters on the planet. It's not the biggest, but it's definitely like top 20. The Chesapeake Bay Impact Crater is one of the best preserved craters in the world, although today sediments have slumped it into a large depression. So not only is the Chesapeake Bay part, like the Susquehanna River flows over, you could see remnants of it, but it is also not, in addition to all of the things which we're talking about, it's also, it has this crater from outer space. However, there are other theories that say it wasn't a crater from outer space, but a indication of something from underground. Regardless, there's a 25-mile large depression underneath the Chesapeake Bay. The final chapter of this story involves Pennsylvania's last geologic event known as the Ice Age. This is what? So I find this, we can see this is a cross section of the Susquehanna River, or it's showing its slope. from its high point, and then how it goes down. And it gets really, really steep. This is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and then this is where it empties into the Chesapeake Bay. And you can see this river gets it starts going down really, really sharp right around here. It's always kind of going down from Cooperstown, but this area right here is very unique, and this is where we find the river house. Eventually, around 10 to 8,000 years ago, the Susquehanna formed a 400-foot canyon. That's what we're seeing here, this canyon, so like the Grand Canyon, where it flowed into the Chesapeake Bay. Today, sedimentation has filled the canyon and helped create what we know today as the Atlantic coastal plain. All right, so we know that this is a very unique, special area. No one really talks about it. It's covered in petroglyphs and world first, and it's a geological mystery. No one talks about what that is. They just kind of ignore it. Everyone knows about the Nile and the Colorado and the Amazon, but this wonder in the highest population center on the planet, from Boston to Washington D.C., this is like no one knows about this. So I want to talk about now specifically this area right here, where from here to here, this is where the river is the most interesting. It is remarkable how within short distances of several large Pennsylvania cities, areas of almost complete isolation exist, offering those who care to enter and explore them some of the most unusual bits of unsuspected Pennsylvania. That's exactly what we're talking about right here. This complete isolation exists, like right around here. I mean, obviously people live here, but it is relatively complete isolation. One of these bits of isolated terrain lies within a half-an-hour automobile ride from Lancaster or York. This is the Great Lower Gorge of the Susquehanna River. This area here, this is the Great Lower Gorge. And it's from Turkey Hill below Columbia and flows to Tidewater 40 miles away through the deep canyon-like gorge, which it has carved in the ancient rocks of the Piedmont. So right here's Columbia. This is where it's saying it started. This is where, like at this bend where Chickies Rock is. Let's see if I've got a greater map right here. Right here is where that bend is. From here to here, the elevation of this river, it just drops immensely. Like, because of the way the world is now, we're not walking and we have cars. We might notice some of the hilliness. It's a little bit hidden how steep of a drop that this goes. But from here to here, this is some of the most unusual and unique geology on the East Coast. The walls of this gorge are precipitous, rising several hundred feet above the river in many places. Let's see. The Susquehanna Gorge Formation starts or takes its shape south of Columbia, PA, below Turkey Hill. The Susquehanna River is funneled to Port Deposit, Maryland, through deep canyon-like gorge. Carved into the ancient rock of the Piedmont, the river is squeezed through a quarter-mile gorge while dropping sharply, roughly 6 feet per mile. On the flat bottom of the 40-foot-long gorge are 6 spoon-shaped depressions called the Susquehanna Deeps. These deeps first appeared on Latrobe's map, derived from his 1801 survey. So what they're saying is that there are these, they're calling them spoon-shaped depressions. They're like cutouts, and we'll see them right here. You see these things? Let me make this bigger. So these are cross sections. So this is the floor of the river, and then you've got these deeps. These are the deeps, and they go down, and what they are like maybe 2 miles long, going along the way of the flow of the river, but they might be 20 feet deep, 20 feet wide, but they go down 100, 200 feet below the water. put this in context with also this mysterious like meteorite. Like no one's like tying them together because they're maybe like 150 miles apart. But in my personal opinion, I think they're pointing to something unusual about this area, and particularly why there's so many underground bases here. But that's another conversation. I'm going to keep going into this. Some of the deeps are over 100 feet deep, their deepest portions existing below sea level. The Susquehanna Gorge has been of much interest to geologists for various reasons. Within its confines, hidden under the river's waters and paralleling its course, are a number of long trenches. So this is another article kind of talking about the deeps too. I'm just doing a comparison of these like mysterious, like deep cuts into the floor of this mysterious river. Are a number of long trenches known as deeps. Several of these penetrate below sea level. These gash-like openings in the river bottom were discovered when the flow of the river was diverted from the construction of power in the dams in the gorge, Holtwood 1919, Conewengo in 2021, and Safe Harbor in 1930. They measure up to 2 miles in length, 125 feet in deep. So right here, it says that they knew about it in the 1801 survey. Here they say that they didn't find out about them until the Holtwood Dam. Here they say Holtwood Dam was made in 1909. Here it's 1919. These are two different articles. So if they're saying you only knew about it because they diverted the water to make the dam, then how did Latrobe know about it in 1801? You know, it's a general question. What I do know is these deeps are rich in lore, in the local myths, native myths, and then also early settlers. Like there's all sorts of strange things associated with these deeps. I'm just going to leave it as a mystery for you right now. This gorge has been a barrier to human movement. Because of this 40-mile stretch of white water, so without the dams, this would be like really intense white water. The Susquehanna is unique among American rivers. These rapids that show the river's steepest gradient is near its mouth, so it's getting really, really steep right before it empties out into the Chesapeake Bay. Such conditions exist in most of the great African rivers, but they are not found in any other river on our Atlantic seaboard. Barrier rapids prevent ocean vessels from passing upstream on the Congo, Zambezi, and the Niger. The same applies to the Susquehanna. So also remember, like the connection between the Susquehanna and, you know, assuming all of the tectonic plate Pangea theories are accurate, like, you know, there's an African river connection, the Susquehanna River connection. In 1608, John Smith was forced to turn his ship around at the rapids below Conewengo. Later, they were known as Smith Falls. So that's what we see on this map here. He was able to go to right here, the Chesapeake Bay, or like the mouth of it, and he turned around because all of this was just like too much of this right here. It says Smith Falls. He had to turn around because the river was not. They couldn't go upstream. This is called Susquehanna Flu. That Susquehanna River. This is the first time it's named. This is where the name Susquehanna River comes from this map right here, because it had a lot of different names from different people. But okay, let's go back to where we are in our story. We haven't even gotten to the weird stuff yet. I better speed along, I suppose. There has, of course, been much speculation concerning the origin of these deeps because they have been excavated in solid rock. So the Susquehanna River it's not a deep river at all. It averages like 9 feet deep in most areas, and doesn't have a muddy bottom. The bottom is solid rock. This is a picture. This is what the river looks like right by where I live. This is the exposed rock. The water's low when the satellite image was taken. This is what the floor of the river looks like. It is solid rock. These deeps are excavated in like the hardest rock, not the hardest, but very, very hard rock. Most workers agreed that they were the result of tremendous flow, meaning like there was something of immense flow coming downstream, which carved these deeps. But the problem is to explain this excess water. Well, why would some water go down and make these deeps and not in other places? There's no answer to that. It may be that when the Susquehanna River was channeled for meltwater from ice sheets when it was emptied south via the Finger Lakes in New York, such quantities of water pouring through seaward formed the gorge gouged out the deeps. Some persons, however, maintain that the deeps existed long before any ice age. They attribute the origin to faulting or cracks in the Earth's crust. This is what a lot of people think that hole or that 25-mile crater in the floor of the Chesapeake is mostly pointing to like deep underground access. Lying along lines of weakness in which the gorge itself may have been a component of. Other explanations have not been lacking, so in a sense, the deeps are still one of our state's unsolved geologic riddles. No one knows the answer. No one knows the answer. No one's talking about it. And this is like the most, the mysterious place. So this is where the house, the property where we're going to be living. This is this is the river right here. This is, a satellite image, and you can see that it was, as I said before, like this is the stone. This is the same. This is a close-up of that. This is where that house is. This is the stone floor. This is where I'm going to be living. This is where the next step in the Susquehanna Mystery for me. So, wow, 1 hour in, and now I'm going to get into things get weird. I hope you guys are still paying. I hope someone's still paying attention to this. A lot of information, but this is where it's going to get good. All right, so I've talked about this a lot. This book called A Story Waiting to Pierce You, and the book was given to me. First time I met Ross Ben in person, I went to one of his Wissahickon tours, and I put out there that I was going to go and meet up with Ross. I think we had already done a couple of episodes. We had met just over an internet connection, but we hadn't met face to face. And so we met face to face, and someone who I knew, or someone who follows my work knew I was going to be there. And he gives me this book called A Story Waiting to Pierce You. And this was 2021, actually. And it was it was an important book for me. And so let me talk a little bit about it. His name was Abaris, which simply means the Avar, referring to the nomadic bowmen of Central Asia. This is according to classical scholar Peter Kingsley's exquisite and well-documented new book, A Story Waiting to Pierce You, a source for much of this article. And so part of the story is about this Abaris, the Avar. He walks around with this arrow given to him from Apollo himself. And you could pause here and read all of this if you want, but I'm just going to read the underlined portions. I underline them. Ancient sources say explicitly that Abaris traveled in a circle around Greece and Central Asia and called their envoys arrow circulators, which also was how they're described by Chinese observers. So here we're seeing this the same guy, Abaris, the Hyperborean. It's the Wikipedia entry. The Wikipedia description of who Abaris is and the Peter Kingsley description of who he is, they vary considerably, but they're clearly talking about the same person. In Greek mythology, Abaris was a legendary sage, healer, and priest of Apollo, known to the ancient Greeks. The craft derived its name from a legendary arrow carried by, I'm not certain what the craft is, carried by the ancient Greek sage Abaris the Hyperborean. The arrow was given to Abaris from the sun god Apollo. So that's part of this story. And Here, Abaris traveled in a circle around Greece, and the Mongols called their envoys arrow circulators. So, and by definition, okay, so this is a different article, but it's talking about Abaris, and it's talking about a story waiting to pierce you. By definition, a new era, a revolution in thought, cannot grow out of the dichotomies and structures, the being of the past, which define the shape of possibility. The future must be created afresh by those who are able to journey to the undifferentiated ground that underlies being and brings back a new dispensation from the gods and the ancestors. This is the task of the skywalkers who visit heaven and the underworld and then become the arrow circulators who cast a sacred circle around the land and consecrate its new destiny. All right, so now the reason why that story was so interesting to me or so important, I read A Story Waiting to Pierce You 5 times before I realized why I kept reading. It's not a long story, so it's not a big deal to read it 5 times. I think it was like maybe 70 pages. Real easy read too, like easy 70 pages. I made this in 2013, and I always knew it was important. I always knew it was special. I'm going to open it up for you as I talk. And it wasn't until I read that book that it kind of began to make sense. And what it was is that I made an arrow. I made a friggin' arrow. And as I read that Peter Kingsley story, I made this arrow in 2013. So before the Starboard, before I moved to Wilmington, Delaware, when I was still living a pretty normal matrix life, I made this when I was making all of my art. And I didn't know what I was making. I just knew how to make it. It was like, it was amazingly clear to me what to make. And then when I made it, I was like, I knew I made something special. I just didn't know what it was. And what we have here is Maryland Serpentine. We've got it wrapped in this Susquehanna Mystery map. I'll show the Susquehanna Mystery map first. It's a map I quilted. I made the Susquehanna River. See the river right there? That's the blue thing. Chesapeake Bay, you can see that orange. That's the crater. But that's not what I'm here to show you right now. I'm here to show you this. Here's the arrow. Here's the point. And I made this. And eventually it made sense to me, like, as I read that story, that, somehow, like, this is when we're getting into this, like, these multiple many worlds interpretations. I'm like, how is this story bleeding over? Like, it was the most normal, natural thing, the unfolding, to go onto this tour with Ross Ben, and someone gives me a book. I didn't want to read it, but I read it anyway. And then I kept reading it because I'm like, I know there's some reason I need to keep on reading it, until I made the correlation that this arrow, I'm not saying it's the same thing as Abaris's arrow. I'm not saying I'm Abaris, but I'm saying, like, as a theme, as a story, as something, like, this really bled over. Like, this stone right here on my finger, that's from the Sacred Valley in Peru. I got this in Peru. This has such an important connection to me, like, making it. Like, I know how, like, all of the different pieces are meaningful. And when I realized that I made this arrow, like, I started reading the book and looking about what's actually happening in my life, and, like, how my life is beginning to take a very different path than what I thought it was going to be, and seeing the role of the arrow and maybe even the arrow carrier, regardless of my desire of how I think my life is going to go, there seems to be another story which is in play as well. But now I want to add a different book. And I've talked about this arrow story many times before. So when Christy and I moved into this house here in Bechtelsville in early January, she started reading this book, Wilderness Path, to her daughter. And this book was a self-published book from probably mid-2000s, and it was written by Christie's great aunt. And it's a piece of historical fiction, and it, as you could see right here, takes place in the 1740s. It takes place in the Ole Valley, which is basically where we live, and it deals with Lenape Indians and Mennonites and a Catholic priest. And the story began to bleed off of its pages into our regular life. And so first thing is the story takes place in the Ole Valley. And it makes sense it would take place in the Ole Valley because the lady who wrote it, that's where she lived. And it would be, thank you. It would make sense. That would be a point of reference. And so we can see right here, the Ole Valley is 10 miles northeast of Reading, Pennsylvania. It has a strong historical heritage. Before European settlers arrived in the valley, it was the home of the Delaware or Lenape, or a tribe of the Lenape. In fact, it was the Native American that gave Ole its name. And Lenape Olink means kettle, which is roughly the shape of the valley, which was an important meeting place for Native Americans. The sacred oak, which is located about 1 mile from Main Street, is more than 500 years old, and it's a site which the Lenape made treaties and settled their differences. And so the first European settlers arrived in the Ole Valley in the early 1700s. And the story kind of uses this as a backdrop. And I was interested, as soon as I heard Christy reading it, as soon as I heard her reading it to her daughter, and knowing that it was stories and books historically have a strong, bleed over in my life. Movies, I became interested. I knew that I was living here and I wanted to become a part of it. So I started reading it as well. And what happened next was just, it just became more and more personal. So this is where the Ole Valley is right here. This is where our house is. And here's the sacred oak, which is talking about today. The sacred oak still grows in a forested area just off Friedrichsburg Road. Elders of the Lenape tribe have certified the tree has been venerated for 480 years. The current owner, horticulturist, places the tree's age at 700 years. Here's the sacred oak. So this is where it is. So we're reading the book, and just to give you an example of how it bleeds over, it takes place in it has a couple different settings in the book, and it's in the Ole Valley, but they have to go from here back to Philadelphia for, part of the plot. It makes sense. And where they go in Philadelphia is Germantown, the Germantown area. Germantown, founded by German Quaker and Mennonite families in 1686 as an independent borough. Germantown is, it makes sense within the context of the book that would be one of the setting places. But the day that we first read about Germantown, we're going to go and meet Ross Ben. He's given us a tour. And where does Ross Ben live? But he lives in Germantown. He literally lives in the Germantown district. So as we're reading about Germantown on this other timeline, we're walking into it in this timeline in which we're living. And then lastly, in the book, like the part of it is the characters, the Lenape, they're forced off of their land, and where do they go? They go to the more or less the refugee village of Kittanning. And whereas Kittanning, that's, this is part of the story, is that journey to that village. It is right here, like probably 30 miles from Pittsburgh. And the completion of this book, we just finished it like maybe 2 weeks ago, like in the build up to going to Pittsburgh. So like there's all of this kind of like bleed over in the book, but that's not really why I'm telling you this story right now. I'm telling you the story because for one specific reason. In the book itself, in the book we see that it's a historical fiction, and there are historical individuals who are characters, one of which is William Penn. And what I did not know is that, and the author was a reporter and, just a real stickler for details. That was one of the reasons I was excited to read it, was because I knew that whatever like background would be in the book, she's going to have researched, and it's going to be an accurate, though the story, the specific story may be fiction, the background details are going to be based upon like, some sort of historical accuracy. And sure enough, they talk about William Penn. And what I did not know was that William Penn's name, or what he was called by the Lenape, was Mike Wann. He was known as Mike Wann, which, is phonetically the same as Mike Wann, my name. What's even more interesting, you could see it spelled right here a couple different ways: MIKWON, MIQUOM. This is a screenshot from one of the videos I did with Ross Ben. I recognize this backdrop. I did this when I was living in Baltimore, so this would have been winter of 2022. And if you look closely right here, it was a recording on Zoom. This is how I was being silly with my name, and I spelled it MIQUAN, like Mike Wann. And that's literally exactly the same name as William Penn. And so when I read that, and particularly like in context of like Chrissy and I have been talking all about, and we've made some videos and podcasts about a story waiting to pierce you, and the arrow, and how that was bleeding over into our lives. When I saw this Mike Wann and William Penn, like it certainly gave us pause. And what the question the first question I asked, I'm like, well, what does that imply? The idea of reincarnation or past lives. That's not it's not a hot button of mine. I mean, I don't know. So, and I don't put any energy into it because I don't really know it's something that I can prove. So when I read that, I did not take that as like I am a reincarnation of William Penn, but I did recognize that there was some sort of parallel in the fact that William Penn plays a lot in the history which Ross Ben shares as relates to the Lenape, and whereas William Penn's ability to make true relationships with the people of the area to only have been used as a tool by people around him, William Penn was. His relationships were then used for other people's benefits. I thought that was I wasn't really certain how to take that phonetic correspondence, but I did look a little bit deeper, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, why did they call him Mike Wann? Well, they called him Mike Wann, or at least the explanation is because because it was a pun on William Penn's name, like Penn. So instead of a pen, it would have been a quill. So I don't know if like pen is, I think of a pen like, a fountain pen. This would have been before fountain pens, but maybe they did use the word pen for a quill or a feather which was dipped in ink. So I thought a little bit about it, and I went and I checked, and sure enough, like Mike Wann actually just means feather. It's the Algonquin word for feather. And so now this begins to tie back into the arrow, because feathers and arrows, they go hand in hand, because it is the feather that makes an arrow fly. If it wasn't for a feather, an arrow wouldn't fly, and it has all sorts of significance, whether it's like for a variety of reasons. I looked into like Mongolian archery and the feathers in which they use and so forth. And so there's definitely a correspondence there. So now I've got like the arrow in my hand, and I'm watching this kind of story unfold. And now there's this Mike Wann feather sort of correspondence. And, this is where the multi-world bleed through. I'm like, what exactly is happening here? So I want to kind of take that idea and pause it for a moment. So this right here is the location of where the house is. This is the Susquehanna River. This is that we are right in the middle of this 40 mile drop. And this is where all the deeps are. And this is where I'm finding this new house where we're going to be living. And it is 8 miles from Safe Harbor. This is Safe Harbor, and this we see is where the petroglyphs are. This is Indian Rock Island, the National Register for Big Indian Rock. This is where all the petroglyphs are. The petroglyphs, which Tlaquiel was saying, are connected to the 4 arrows migration. So now we've got the 4 arrows again, and we see that these petroglyphs connect directly to arrow again. So now we've got arrow from Erebus. We got a little bit of a arrow connotation through Mike Wann and feather, and now we've got the 4 arrows migration with Tlaquiel. But what really kind of stopped me in my tracks looking at all this stuff. So right here is Safe Harbor. Right here is where all of the petroglyphs are, and then right here is Apollo County Park. And if you remember, where did the arrow come from? But it was given to Abaris from the sun god Apollo. So now we got Apollo. We got Apollo, the 4 arrow migration. We've got the feather, and we got the migration. So I told you on the most mysterious river, in the most mysterious section of the most mysterious river of the planet. So all right, so let's go to back to 3-dimensional physical reality. We're moving here. This is the house. We're moving here. There's a house here. It's our friend Zach's. We're not moving into the house. What we're actually doing is we're putting up 2 bell tents, 3 bell tents actually. And what a bell tent is, this is a bell tent right here. There's a 12-foot one and a 16-foot one in diameter we're putting up. And you can see these bell tents are kind of inspired by yurts. The housing of the Mongolian nomads from Nome countryside, and the bell tents they're owned by Christy. She's had them for years. She's had them before she's known me, and she also has her own yurt, one that she built by hand with a variety of other people, which has been in storage, and we're going to construct that on the land. Like, we're literally stepping into this storyline even more so. And then to take it a step further, yes, we're going to be living on these tents. We're going to be setting up these tents, but they're only going to be a home base, because what our plan is, this is where we are going to be right here in Pennsylvania. Starting last fall and then through the winter twice, we've gone down here to Florida and Key West 3 times. And now in June, we're going to drive all the way to West Coast and then back. That's going to be about a 5-week trip. We're going to spend a couple weeks here. And then we're going to go up to Maine for a couple weeks. We're going to come back here. And then we're going to go back down to Florida for 6 weeks for a house sitting assignment. And we're doing all of this. And as we do this, we literally bring the arrow and we bring the starboard and we hold starboard ceremonies in whatever places we can as we go along. And we tell the Susquehanna Mystery story when there are audiences and appropriate places to do so. And in fact, we are quite literally becoming arrow circulators. Like, this was not the plan that this is what we are to do, but when we looked at what we were doing, we realized that we are quite literally stepping into the role as illustrated in all of these books. And I haven't even said once, or maybe I've said it once, but one of the main talking points, which I know I have, and both of us, she's been in most of the last 5 or 6 videos that I put out on this channel, collapsing false timelines. Like, this is what we're doing. We are bringing this energy, where it's this, by definition, a new era, a revolution of thought cannot grow out of the dichotomies and structures, the being of the past. There must be arrow circulators who cast a sacred circle around a land and consecrate it to a new destiny. Like, that sounds like the question is like, well, what does that mean in real terms? And like, well, the closest thing I could say in real terms, as I've seen over the past 5 years of my life, as what I called home begins to collapse more and more, and as I've gotten further and further away from the conversation of any sort of lifestyle within the cultural matrix, and have begun to embrace a very, very different lifestyle. In fact, I'm coming to embrace a lifestyle that was thrusted upon me in a certain way, but all of the clues are there that this was written somewhere. This is too well organized that we're literally like, this is what the next the next stage of life is. And so what we're doing is in this circle around North America is starboard we're doing river and star ceremony. This is starboard synchronization, celestial, terrestrial, and ancestral alchemy. We bring the starboard. We bring the living ephemeris. We build the chart for the location we are. We're also building what we did in Pittsburgh. We kicked off the Pittsburgh event by building 2 timelines or 2 dates on the starboard, the date of the founding of Pittsburgh and then that current date, so that we can begin to collapse to false timelines. We're sharing the Susquehanna Mystery. We're literally bringing stones from river to river, stones from the Susquehanna River, which we're putting in the rivers which we're visiting, and likewise picking up rivers from those stones from those rivers to bring to the next places we're going. Like, this is an ancient practice of like literally weaving reality from river to river. And this is what we're doing. We're circulating the arrow. We're collapsing false timelines and narratives. And, I can't think of a better way of describing both like our intention, like, what the natural way where I've naturally come in my mind, and where she's naturally come in her mind of what our lives are about, which is really like preparing for a reality which is outside of and different than this cultural matrix paradigm that we've both been born into. Like, I can't think of a better description of how life has unfolded. This is purely organic, but we could see it's written in these books, is consecrating the land. So this is where we're going to wrap it up. So what are our next steps? We're literally selling uh, we're selling all that we can. There's not really a place for anything. So we're getting rid of the things where we no longer have a house. Um, we're going to be doing a silent auction. Like, I've got a lot of artwork, beautiful artwork, which there's no place to put it, and it needs to have a new home. And it's one of the few assets which I have, which I could probably translate into money. I mean, money has. I'm no longer part of this society. I still need to pay for gas, though, and so this is one of the ways which we're going to be able to fund these next steps, because it's really embracing life in a completely different sort of texture and way of reality. So that's coming soon. It's anyone who is an art collector who wants to support this work. That's going to be a really neat thing we can do. Also, I don't know how many more of these YouTube videos are going to happen. We are still communicating through the Telegram group. Telegram is just easy. YouTube is difficult. We can do that on the fly. And so that is going to be something we're going to continue to state where we're going to be. And we're looking for people to connect with. Like, when we go through, when we cross the country, we're looking for places where we can meet locals who could help us organize, like, events where we can go and do our starboard ceremony. I mean, some are small, some are big. We've done some with just like 2 people. We've done some with, like, I don't know, 25, 30 people is probably the largest ones. We want to connect with the host. We want to connect with people. So that's kind of where this is ending up. There's a strange but obvious structure seemingly supporting this swan dive into this next step or this next chapter, at least for the next 6 months of life for me and her. And so this might be the last video I put out here for some time. Actually, that's not true. I'm going to be putting out the silent auction videos of the individual pieces of art. Let me see if I can show this to you right now. Those are going to be the pieces of art which we're going to be selling. And I will do some videos, like short videos, explaining what each one is and like how you can go and bid upon those pieces. But other than that, like, this is this is the last probably big story you're going to hear from me for a while. I think I'm going to go back on the podcast circuit, being guests on other people's shows, because that's going to be a way to reach a wider audience. But for the most part, like, for all of those of you that have hung along here with me on YouTube, this has been, I appreciate that. I appreciate the witness. For those who want to continue to participate, Telegram is going to be the way to do it. There's going to be a link on this video on how to, what the Telegram link is. We'll send you the link, then you can see that sort of update. If you're interested in, like, if you want to get a piece of art, or if any other way of support, reach out on email or something like that, and we can talk. But other than that, this is Uncle Mike. This is Mike Wann, Mike Wann, Feather, checking out. All right, my friends, until our paths cross again.